So it can be a series that continues on.
And one of the challenges for you, of course, looking after the archive, and I have to say the World War II exhibition in the museum is absolutely wonderful. But how do you make those decisions? You've got a collection that we would need to have 10 times the size of the museum to show it all off. That must be an incredibly difficult challenge for you.
Yeah, it can be. It's really, we identify, obviously with the exhibitions, that what type of exhibition they want to do. Then we try and look at the type of campaign or operation or battle, and then see what we've got that's appropriate to show off the collection to its best, but also support the actual interpretation that we're trying to do, to give you an idea of what the uniforms people were wearing, the uniforms the combat troops were wearing, and the weapons that they were using as well. So what my job as well is to do is to find gaps within the collection and look to actually purchase items. So we bought two Breeder 38 machine guns for our Italian tanks only the last week or so ago. We're always looking for areas, gaps in the collection, so we can improve it and put those on. So yeah, it's important that we maintain the collection, but it's important that we show it. There's no point having a collection like we have without getting it out there and people seeing it.
Well, I'm sure everybody who's been around the museum today will be very grateful for all the hard work that you put into it, and we're really pleased to have your knowledge here in our main arenas this afternoon. And the first of the vehicles that you wish to talk to us about is now here, so I'll leave it with you.
Yes, thanks, Steve. So we have the T-34-85. Basically, what we have here is the sloped armour, the wide tracks, and the diesel engine that we saw when the Germans attacked in June 1941. What they would come across was a slightly different turret with a 76mm gun. And the T-34-76 was revolutionary when the Germans came across it. They came across it with their Panzer IIIs, their Panzer IVs, and they were struggling with their 3.7cm guns to knock these tanks out. What they had to use was superior tactics and basically outflank them. They couldn't penetrate the frontal armour on the T-34s at this stage. So the problem for the Soviets at this time was they had the tanks and tank technology. They didn't really have the tactical skills to employ and use the tanks properly. But they catch up. They start learning in the campaigns into 42. They're starting to improve their tactical capabilities. And what they're doing as well is they're improving the manufacture and development of the tank and how to speed up the process of producing the tank. And over that period of time, 42 to 43, they take off about a third of the production time of producing the T-34. You might have remarked yourself when you've seen the T-34 that there's a lot of cast marks on it and the welds don't look neat. They are not spending time finishing them off. That's the whole point. It's about manufacturing them, getting them out there, and getting them into combat. So that's basically what they're doing. They're not wasting time. Now, what happens is that they're actually going to go through effectively a twofold sort of approach. And they're looking at developing the T-43 and later the T-44. What they're hoping to do is keep the T-34-76 going. The problem is the Germans introduced basically the Panther in July 1943 at the Battle of Kursk, the Aus-D. Now obviously the Panther's been influenced by the T-34 with its sloped armour, and whilst the Soviets have a very good defensive battle and they engage using their T-34-76, they engage at short ranges for about 500 metres. It's obvious that at longer ranges they are outgunned by these new vehicles coming in with the Germans. They're upgrading their Panzer IVs, putting more armour on, and they've basically introduced the 75 on the Panzer IV. They've got the Panther, and the Tiger's appeared as well. So there is a bit of a game change going on in that 1943 period, and the Soviets realised that they have to up-gun this tank. So they take what essentially is the hull, pretty much leave that alone, but they look at the actual turret. The problem that the T-34-76 had as well is it had a two-man turret. That overloaded the commander. He had basically to obviously command the tank, direct the crew, what was going on, but he had to operate as a loader. That takes him away from doing observing and targeting other targets. By the time you get to the T-34-85 here, we will get to a three-man crew. That involves having a loader. This frees up the commander to actually start doing his job of commanding the tank rather than being involved in actual firing the tank, firing the gun. The key bit here as well was that the Soviets had already got available a 85mm gun, which has come off their anti-aircraft production line. This has been already used in the Su-85 tank destroyer and in the KV-85. So the gun had been already out there, and so it's got its own ammunition. They start, they improve it. It's not as good as the gun that's on Panther, the 75 that's on the Panther, but it's still a good anti-tank weapon. And so basically, the SS-53 gun that we get into the T-34-85 is a bit of a game changer. They have to enlarge the turret ring to allow this larger turret to go on. And we do see the weight increase coming up as well into the early to mid-30s in terms of tonnage. But it gives the tank the ability to penetrate about 130 mils worth of armour. So it becomes a much more capable tank. You've got 55 rounds of stowage in this vehicle as well. The problem for the Soviets, they weren't doing what the Americans were doing with the Shermans. They weren't lowering the ammunition as low as they could. So you're still going to have rounds in the turret that means they're ready racks. So basically, you could get some quickly, but that means that if you do get penetrated, you're going to get that flash fire coming in there, and you could get explosions. So there's not the same attention to detail on stowage and these types of items. In terms of what's going on inside as well, is that there's no there's no turret basket in there, so the seats are suspended off the turret ring. So as it goes round, they're going round with it, but there's no turret basket to actually turn with it. It is an effective tank, and it comes out in March 1944. So roughly you're looking at effectively 9 months till it comes out into action. So again, shows you the capabilities of the Soviet industrial complex, where they've got 3 major tank factories that are able to retool up and get a new turret out with a new gun. And it extends the life of the T-34. You're looking at about 14,300 of these tanks being produced. And that's including the short post-war period as well. And it was a stopgap whilst they work on their T-43 and T-44, which unfortunately doesn't go too far, but it allowed them to actually continue to fight and successfully beat the Germans. If we actually go to the mobility of the vehicle, obviously we've got the V234 diesel engine, which is in the rear. We've got the basically Christie suspension here as well. So you've got the actual road wheels there, the double road wheels, and you've got the basically the idler at the front and the drive at the back, and this is going to basically push this vehicle around about 54 kilometres an hour on the road and about 30 cross country. The wide tracks make it capable of operating, especially in the country or the terrain of Russia. This is where it's going to be operating in. It's designed for those cold climates. It's designed for the wide open steppes, once you get down to Ukraine. This is what it's designed for. So they are looking at the type of territory that they have and the places that they're operating on, and this is what they're trying to do. You'll also see the external fuel as well. Very early adopters of that of having the ability to have external, which increases its range. So you're nearly getting 300 kilometres worth of range in these vehicles. That means you don't have to keep refuelling it, which is a major issue as well. In terms of actually driving it, you've got the connecting rods that go all the way to the back. It is physically demanding, which I'm sure Jeremy will, as we chat to him shortly, will be able to tell you about. It's a very effective tank. You know, there's no bells and whistles on it. It is what you see, and it's about that capability there. It's really about producing large numbers of these vehicles, getting them into action, and then producing more, and overwhelming you with the size of their tank armies. You can also see on here what we call grab handles. So rather than wasting time on actually having infantry in armoured personnel carriers, half tracks, that type of thing, they'll use some Lend-Lease ones the Americans have given them. They weren't wasting their time building their own. They would have their own, basically, submachine gun companies attached to these tanks. So they'd be tank riders. They'd be holding on and going into action. When they come under fire, they just drop off and go in. It saves a lot of time and effort, so they can just focus on basically building more of these platforms. We've got the DCM machine guns in the hull, and we've got them in the coaxial as well. Now, the thing in terms of protection, once you start sloping the armour, obviously you're increasing the chance of ricochets going on. It increases the thickness as well, so effective thickness of of the frontal glacis plate there is about 122 millimetres. About 90 off the front mantlet, so you've got some decent protection there. You've got the ability to sort of survive quite a lot of the main tanks that are coming out towards you. By 44, 45, you're obviously coming up against the 8.8 centimetre and the Panther, so it's getting harder to survive, but still, it's not a bad tank in terms of its capabilities in that period. The other thing you've got here is the fact that this is a Polish-built, post-war built, early 50s built T-34-85. So it's got certain things that are going on with the castings of the turret. It's got a slightly different nose at the front there as well, and it's got a slightly different cupola for the commander. The evolution of things like the cupola, vision devices was really important for the Soviets to be able to sort of deal with the Germans tactically. When the Germans first invaded in June 1941, the T-34-76 in many ways weren't supplied with the actual radios because they'd moved the factories back. So they were having to do what was called platoon movement, which was actually follow my leader. So the platoon commander would drive his tank and you'd watch what was going on and you'd follow what he was doing. That would only work when you're opened up. So when we get into the T-34-85, you've got this ability, they're much more into a very much more tactically aware and command structure that is much more capable of fighting the Germans at this stage, and they're able to communicate and have a radio net that's effective, and so it's a much more effective vehicle. And this is we just talked about the Sherman being the tank that won the war. You could say if you were in Serbia, this is the tank that won the war. And this is why, if you ever went to, you still go out there, but if you ever been out to Eastern Europe, all those towns, they have them sitting on plinths. Cold War, this tank was the tank that actually won the war, and that was sitting there, and this would dominate those towns, and you'd be aware of this all the time. They go, obviously, post-war, they're out in Korea. We see the North Koreans using them, going down to Busan in 1950, only stopped by the Americans in their tanks. And we start seeing them being used by, obviously, Warsaw Pact countries, and also client states, so in Middle East and down to Africa. Now I hand you back to Steve.
Well, there's certainly an awful lot to know about this particular vehicle, and I'm now going to have a quick chat to Jeremy. He's had the pleasure, of course, of bringing the tank onto the in the main arena. Something that Stuart mentioned is that these are incredibly physical machines, aren't they, to manoeuvre and to drive, and obviously because of the speed of it, I imagine that's quite a challenge.
They are physically demanding, and I'd like to pay a particular thank Chris, who's actually driving it today. I have to remember that I'm no longer a size of 50. I am not fit, and I am about 6 inches too tall. They were designed to be operated by 18 to 25-year-olds in their physical fitness, and indeed the Soviets actually had many women drivers driving these into combat. But yes, it's a clutch-to-brake steering system, so for somebody my age, you come out of driving that for 50 minutes and you feel like you've done 3 rounds of Muhammad Ali.
So it certainly keeps you fit. Now, of course, you're one of the volunteers here as well, which is wonderful, and we're very grateful for that and for the hard work that you put into maintaining the fleet here at the Tank Museum. You just talked then about how demanding it is. Ultimately, I guess, it's wonderful that we're showing this off, and it just really struck me when Stuart was speaking that we're looking at something that is nearly 80 years old. And here it is, and it looks amazing, and I can't imagine my car will look that good when it's 80. It has to be a labour of love to keep something like this going.
Yes, I think we're very fortunate because this is good Soviet agricultural engineering. So there's no complex electronics, no control systems. As was mentioned, all the operation is by controlled rods, so you can actually physically check, follow them back, make sure that they're working. You're not going to start dealing with printed circuit boards or anything complex like that. Yes, we've had a few problems with the engine. In fact, we had to put a new engine in, which took us about 6 months to actually source it and about a year to fit it in. A few teething problems, but we got there in the end. So, much more complex vehicles out there, operated such as the Centurion, but it is an iconic vehicle, and there does come a certain pleasure of operating something that is a living part of history.
So the moral of the story is back in the 80s we all should have bought larder, shouldn't we? That's what you're telling me. Lovely. Well, Jeremy, thank you very much indeed for speaking to me, and we will look forward to getting some great pictures and video of you taking the tank around the arena shortly. Just a reminder, of course, we have got the British Army vehicles coming your way Saturday this afternoon. And just be aware as well that around 4 o'clock, so around 4 o'clock, 1600 hours, there will be some gunfire. Don't worry, it's all part of the display that's taking place elsewhere. But just be aware that there will be some gunfire at around 4 o'clock, between 4 and 4:05 this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, we'll wait for the T-34-85 to start back up again and listen to the engine for a little bit. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out with sloped armour is, as you slope it, you reduce the internal size for the crew. So the thing with the T-34s is, not only have you got slope plates, but you've also got the crispy suspension, which lowers the internal volume in there. So you've got good protection, but less space for the crew to operate in.
It steers by the one track, so one track's in lower gear and the other track's in higher gear. Basically, it's like you said, clutch and brake, so you clutch what you brake, or that's why you twist like that. Simple, but it's all twist.
Clank, 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 coming towards you.
That's because it's got high tolerances.
If you're in your foxhole and
So basically,
you can hear
when
that
the frost,
rumble coming
when the cold
towards you,
gets to
you
it,
can't see it.
it's got the room for expansion. It's
That's the
more
type
higher
of thing that
tolerances.
would be getting you concerned, knowing that there's massive T-34-85s coming towards you. and you're dependent on your anti-tank guns, you maybe use Sterling Schutz and some handheld anti-tank weapons. That's the type of thing that's going to get you.